to say that we really don't recommend that any longer because of the fact that we can't get the common temperature from the core of the jar to the outside of the jar to all be the same. The jar lids come in boxes like this, and they come in various brand names, and it doesn't matter what brand it is, they all work equally well as long as you warm them before you put them on the jar itself. Making sure your jar is full is very important as well. Make sure you use a non-metal bubble breaker, and that's what the plastic knife was for, as well as making your bands finger tight, not muscle tight, and taking them off when you get ready to store your jars so that you can get them off. There was a time when we used to tell people to leave them on, and then when you got ready to open the jar, it was almost impossible because all the sticky had dried in there as well as rusting, and you couldn't get the band off, and then the jar food was lost completely. And don't let the jars sit in the canner overnight. That's one of the things I have to be careful of because I do a lot of canning. Because I work full time, I start canning at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I'm still processing at 1 in the morning. So I have in the past, but don't do it now, is that I would leave the last load in the canner and pull them out in the morning. And that's not a good idea because you've got warm, wet conditions in which you're allowing food to sit. And even though inside the jar may not be a problem, it's the particles that may be floating in the water that are attaching under the rim of the ring as well as possibly in the rim of the jar. And so no matter how tired you are, make sure you take them out of the canner before you go to bed and not leave them in overnight. And so that, again, we need to remember that we need to keep things clean and safe. And I think we'll probably show you the simmering pot as we move into the next section. But when we're talking about water bath, we're talking about a big pan that's full of water 1 inch above the jar lid at least. And then what you're going to do is you're going to let that come to a, don't turn it up to high. Turn it up to medium high if you're on electric or gas until the water begins to not actually bubble and boil, but rather there's a big steam cloud above the pot, because what we're doing is we're steaming the water, not boiling the water. Boiling the water and turning it up, cranking it up to high is not going to make it go any faster, and it's also a chance that the jars are going to break. And it's also going to cause the food in the jars to overcook, and then you're going to have these mushy, non-fibrous kinds of things in your jar that are not going to be very appetizing. And the chances of breaking jars is going to be even higher as we process the canner. And so that we need to, what I call the witch's brew. It's sort of like if you remember back to some of the children's stories of the witch stories at Halloween time of how the cauldron bubbled and it was steaming, but it wasn't bubbling and splurting out all over the place. And magically we have it ready to go. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to have the steam coming off, and I'll show you the rack, and I'll try not to burn my fingers because we've got hot water in here. Is that this is a hot water bath canner pot. It's not a stock pot. But what it is we have a rack that is shaped and spaced so that we can put the jars down in the rack. The handles are bent so that you can actually hang the basket on the rim of the pot so that you can put your jars down in the pot.
Fits perfectly.
And it allows them to sit without falling around, and then you just plop them down in the water and making sure you've got at least an inch of water above the jar. This one doesn't have any anything in it, so it's going to float. And then you put the lid on, and then when the jars are cold, so it's going to take a while now to get that back up to temperature. Okay, so you don't start talking about timing, like if you're having to do peaches for 35 minutes for a pint. Oh. Don't start the timer as soon as you put them down in. You've got to wait and peek to make sure that there's a witch's brew before you start your timing. Then turn on the timer.
I think I've made that mistake.
Yes, it's very easy to, especially when we're in a hurry and we're tired, is that you've got to wait until it's back up to a brew, that which is steaming, stuff coming off the top, and then start counting your time. But don't turn the heat up because you're going to end up breaking jars. And breaking jars is awful.
Yes.
you not only lose the food, but you've got all that mess to clean up. And broken glass is not fun to clean up when you're working in the kitchen. So, do you have any other questions, Stephanie, for hot water bath stuff?
No, I think I want to remember that we want to put our jars down into our witch's brew and then watch as it cools down and wait for the witch's brew to come back and then start timing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a timer's important. I carry a timer around with me when I'm canning because I have a tendency to multitask.
Yes.
Amazing. And I may be out in the garden picking something and forgetting that, oops, it's time to get the cans out, and overcooking is just as bad as undercooking. And so the timer goes with me. And I have timers setting all over the house usually during canning season, simply because that's the way we have to do it. So, but timing is important. Let it sit for about 5 minutes after you've turned the heat off to allow everything to settle a little bit. Then, in this particular case, you can then I'll take the floating jar out because an empty jar doesn't. You just carefully bring up let it sit like that. Then you can take the cloth, tap off the water on the top of your jars so you don't have to carry the water all over the place. And then using your nifty tongs, you can then lift your jars out, put them out on your newspaper.
They're like magic, those tongs.
And
Very
these are
helpful.
Wonderful. And so if you need to ask for a special gift, that wish list of, gee, this is what I'd like to have, put it on your list, and I'm sure it will find itself in the kitchen one of these days. And you just simply put them out, leaving space, and let them sit for 12 hours. And during that 12 hours, you're going to hear,
You're popping.
they're ding, yay, they're sealed. So again, thank you for your attention. If you ever have questions on any of these canning kinds of questions, don't hesitate to call the Extension office here in Bloomington at 349-2575. Or you can check in at Mother Hubbard's Cupboard because Stephanie's becoming our expert at the cupboard.
Getting there.
So again, thanks Stephanie. Hopefully we can get together again and learn some new techniques.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sue.